All right, hello. And again, we are back with more Frindle. We read chapter 5 in class on Friday. And so just a little recap on chapter 5, that was called The Report. So that was when Nick had to get up in front of his entire 7th period class with Mrs. Granger at the back and give his report on the dictionary and where words come from. And when it started out, he was really nervous. He did not want to do it. He's very concerned that all the work he had done the night before was going to be worthless. He just was not good. So he knew it. As soon as he got into class that day, Mrs. Granger, within 15 seconds, she's like, okay, let's go start your report. And he forgot, or didn't know, but he forgot to give it a title. So she commented on that. Mrs. Granger commented on that. And then he started into it, and Mrs. Granger was actually smiling at him, and he was kind of shocked, like, oh my goodness, she's smiling. And it kind of gave him this feeling like, oh, okay, well, she must think I'm doing good. Great. So he kept going for 12 minutes. This class period was only about 30 minutes to start with, so he was going for 12 minutes. And he tried to keep it going and got to 18 minutes and then realized he could just keep it going and going. And it was kind of his goal to see how long he could get this and see how much class time he could waste. Because once he started going, he realized, oh, I could totally do this. This is not that bad. And he just kept rambling. And Mrs. Granger seemed really happy with it, although at one point she did try to stop him because it was going along, and she was like, well, dude, we have other things we need to do. But all the kids knew what he was trying to do, so they kept trying to help him, asking questions, and say, oh, well, I don't have that dictionary, so I need to know what this one says. That's not the one I have at home. Kept going and going. Then they talked about where do words come from? How does everybody know that DOG spells dog or means dog? And Mrs. Granger talked about other countries and how that word means something different. And she says that if one person changed it and the next person wanted to call it that as well, and the people in the class and the school and the country and everything else wanted to change that word, it would be changed. So, last thing was saying that she was unstoppable because Mrs. Granger, she really had beat him at his own game that day. But he had slowed her down, but she was unstoppable, at least for that day. So I feel like something else is going to come. Let's see. Today I'm going to read chapter 6 and chapter 7. So chapter 6 is called The Big Idea. 3 things happened later that same afternoon. Nick and Janet Fisk had missed the bus because of school newspaper meeting, so they walked home together. They were seeing who could walk along the curb without falling. It took a lot of concentration, and when Janet stepped off into the street, Nick said, "That's 3 points for me." But Janet said, "I didn't fall. I saw something. Look." She bent down and picked up a ballpoint pen, a gold one, the fancy kind. That was the first thing, Janet finding the pen. They got back on the curb, and Nick followed Janet, putting one foot carefully in front of the other on the narrow concrete curb. And while he stepped along, he thought back over the school day, especially about his report, and what Mrs. Granger had said about words at the end of the period finally sank in. That was the second thing, understanding what Mrs. Granger had said. She had said, "Who says D-O-G means dog?" "You do, Nicholas." "You do, Nicholas," he repeated to himself. "I do?" Nick thought, still putting one foot in front of the other, following Janet. What does that mean? And then Nick remembered something else. When he was about 2 years old, his mom had bought him one of those unbreakable cassette players and a bunch of sing-along tapes. He had loved them, and he played them over and over and over and over. He would carry the tape and the player to his mom or his big brother or his father and bang them together and say, "Gwalaga, gwalaga, gwalaga," until someone put the cassette in the machine and turned it on. And for 3 years, whenever he said "gwalaga," his family knew what he wanted to hear, those pretty sounds that made with voices and instruments. Then when Nick went to preschool, he learned that if he wanted his teacher and the other kids to understand him, he had to use the word music. But "gwalaga" meant that nice sound to Nick because Nick had said so. Who says "gwalaga" means music? You do, Nicholas. "No fair," yelled Janet. They were at the corner of their own street, and Nick had bumped into her, completely absorbed in his own thoughts. Janet stumbled off the curb, and the gold pin in her hand clattered onto the street. Sorry, I didn't mean to, honest," said Nick. "I just wasn't watching. Here." Nick stooped over and picked up the pin and held it out to her. "Here's your..." And that's when the third thing happened. Nick didn't say pen. Instead, he said, here's your Frindle. Frindle? Janet took the pen and looked at him like he was nuts. She wrinkled her nose and said, what's a Frindle? Nick grinned and said, you'll find out. See you later. It was there at that corner of Spring Street and South Grand Avenue, 1 block from home, on a September afternoon. That's when Nick got the big idea. Here they are, at the corner. Whoa, here you go. And by the time he had run down the street and up the steps and through the door and upstairs to his room, it wasn't just a big idea. It was a plan, a whole plan, just begging for Nick to put it into action. And action was Nick's middle name. The next day after school, the plan began. Nick walked into the penny pantry store and asked the lady behind the counter for a Frindle. She squinted at him. A what? A Frindle, please, a black one. And Nick smiled at her. She leaned over closer and aimed one ear at him. You want what? A Frindle, and this time Nick pointed at the ballpoint pens behind her on the shelf. A black one, please. The lady handed Nick a pen. He handed her 49 cents and said, thank you, and left the store. 6 days later, Janet stood at the counter of the penny pantry. Same store, same lady. John had come in the day before, and Pete the day before that, and Chris the day before that, and Dave the day before that. Janet was the 5th kid that Nick had sent there to ask that woman for a Frindle. And when she asked, the lady reached right for the pens and said, blue or black? Nick was standing 1 aisle away at the candy racks, and he was grinning. Frindle was a real word. It meant pen. Who says Frindle means pen? You do, Nicholas. Half an hour later, a group of serious 5th graders had a meeting in Nick's playroom. It was John, Pete, Dave, Chris, and Janet. And Nick. And that's 6 kids. 6 secret agents. They held up their right hands and read the oath Nick had written out. From this day on and forever, I will never use the word pen again. Instead, I will use the word Frindle. And I will do everything possible so that others will too. And all 6 of them signed the oath with Nick's Frindle. The plan would work. Thanks, Mrs. Granger. All right, so he's got a plan to get this Frindle word spread out about town. He's got 6 of his friends, 6 secret agents, to do whatever they can to get everybody else to use the word Frindle. All right, and he's attributing all of this to Mrs. Granger. It's her words that got Nick thinking all about this. All right, chapter 7, Word Wars. School was the perfect place to launch a new word. And since this was a major historical event, Nick wanted it to begin in exactly the right class, 7th period language arts. Nick raised his hand first thing after the bell rang and said, Mrs. Granger, I forgot my Frindle. Sitting 3 rows away, John blurted out, oh, I have an extra one you can borrow, Nick. Then John made a big show of looking for something in his backpack. Yeah, I think I have an extra Frindle. I mean, I told my mom to get me 3 or 4. I'm sure I have an extra Frindle in here yesterday, but I must have taken it out. Oh, wait. Yep, here it is. Found it. And then John made a big show of throwing it over to Nick, and Nick missed it on purpose. Then he made a big show of finding it. Mrs. Granger and every kid in the class got the message loud and clear. That black plastic thing that Nick borrowed from John had a funny name, a different name, a new name, Frindle. There was a lot of giggling, but Mrs. Granger turned up the power in her eyes and swept the room into silence. And the rest of the class went by according to plan, her plan. As everyone was leaving after class, Mrs. Granger said, Nicholas, I'd like to have a word with you. And she emphasized the word word. Nick's mouth felt dry and he gulped. But his mind stayed clear. He walked up to her desk. Yes, Mrs. Granger? It's a funny idea, Nicholas, but I will not have my class disrupted again. Is that clear? Her eyes were lit up, but it was mostly light, not much heat. Idea? What idea? Asked Nick, and he tried to make his eyes as blank as possible. You know what I mean, Nicholas. I am talking about the performance that you and John gave at the start of class. I am talking about This. And she held up her pen, an old maroon fountain pen with a blue cap. But I really didn't have a Frindle with me, said Nick, amazed at his own bravery. And hiding behind his glasses, Nick kept his eyes wide and blank. Mrs. Granger's eyes flashed and then narrowed, and her lips formed a thin, hard line. She was quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, I see, very well. Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss today, Nicholas. You may go. Thanks, Mrs. Granger, Nick said, and he grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. And when he was just stepping into the hallway, he said, and I promise I won't ever forget my Frindle again. Bye! So Mrs. Granger thinks she's catching on. But we'll see. We will see. All right, that is the end of chapter 7. Bye, guys. Have a good one.